The late afternoon sun was shining brightly through the living room window, but the air in our bedroom suddenly turned cold. I was 7 months pregnant, feeling heavy and uncomfortable, and I had just come home hoping for a quiet evening. Instead, I found my husband, Leo, calmly packing a massive, expensive, charcoal gray suitcase, the one he usually only took on long international trips. My mind struggled to process the sight. I tried to laugh it off, asking him in a joking, nervous voice if he had suddenly decided to take an unexpected, long business trip without telling me. Leo did not even bother to look up from folding his suits. His voice, when he finally spoke, was flat and devoid of any human emotion, a cold knife cutting through the warm air. He stated simply that he was in love with his young new assistant, a woman named Mila, and that he was leaving me forever, right there and then. He finished by saying I was too dependent, and that the entire pregnancy had changed everything, making him feel trapped. I stood frozen, my hands instinctively flying up to clutch my huge belly, which felt heavy as a stone. I watched, completely paralyzed, as he zipped the suitcase, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked straight out the door. The loud click of the lock turning felt like the end of the world. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like endless hours, the silence in the apartment becoming loud and suffocating. The cold shock eventually gave way to a wave of terrible, crushing anxiety. I tried to convince myself that he would return, that this was just a brief, dramatic mistake he would fix by morning. But when the morning light finally arrived, reality hit with a painful force. I needed to buy groceries, so I went to the ATM down the street. When I checked my balance on the banking app, the screen showed a number that made my stomach drop painfully. 0. Our shared savings account, which held the emergency fund and all my personal money, had been completely, systematically emptied by Leo. I tried using my debit card at the small grocery store, and the machine immediately gave a harsh, loud beep. Transaction declined. The humiliation was intense, and the fear was worse. I frantically called his cell phone, hoping to beg him to leave me enough money for my medical needs, but the line went straight to a generic, unfamiliar voice message. He had not just abandoned me, he had completely, cruelly, and strategically cut off every single financial lifeline I possessed, leaving me utterly alone and defenseless. The next day, I had to drive myself to my prenatal checkup. I felt deeply ashamed walking into the brightly lit waiting room, where every other expectant mother was accompanied by a smiling, supportive partner. I sat down alone, trying desperately to hide my huge, painful belly behind a magazine. When the nurse finally called my name, I felt the scrutiny of the other people in the room. In the examination room, my kind doctor noticed immediately that my blood pressure was dangerously high, and that my face was pale and drawn. She asked me gentle, professional questions about my stress levels and the sudden, terrible loss of weight she had noticed. I tried weakly to tell her that Leo was just traveling on an urgent business trip, but my voice broke on the final word. I completely collapsed onto the examination table, unable to stop the tears, and confessed that my husband had abandoned me without a word and taken all the money. The doctor's face instantly changed from professional concern to deep, profound pity. That look, that knowing, sorrowful look that understood I was facing a severe medical crisis completely alone, was a crushing, new type of humiliation. It was a clear confirmation that my life had completely shattered. The relentless emotional and financial stress of the next few weeks took a terrible toll on my body. At exactly 34 weeks, while I was trying to assemble a small, wooden dresser for the baby's room, I felt a sudden, massive, warm gush. My water had broken, a terrifying 4 weeks too early. The pain and panic were immediate and all-consuming. There was no Leo to rush to the phone or quickly drive me to the hospital. I was completely alone in the house. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled the phone twice before I could dial the emergency number for an ambulance. The sirens were loud and frightening, and the ambulance ride was a terrible blur of high speed and terrifying noise. When we finally arrived at the hospital, the emergency room team worked with frantic urgency. The doctors immediately diagnosed a severe placental abruption, a condition where the placenta prematurely tears away from the uterine wall. It was a life-threatening, immediate emergency for both my fragile son and me. The world felt like it was closing in, and I faced this terrifying crisis completely by myself. There was no time for waiting or fear. I was instantly rushed into the sterile, freezing operating room. The nurses surrounded me, moving quickly and professionally. I was pale, trembling with fear, and fighting the growing pain of the abruption. A nurse pressed a thick clipboard into my shaking hand, urging me to sign the terrifying consent forms. They were for an immediate, emergency C-section, which was necessary to save my son's life, and a list of forms for potential massive blood transfusions, which were necessary to save mine. I had to sign every single form by myself, without the comfort or legal presence of a loved one. My hand shook so hard that the pen nearly slipped as I scrawled my name. The empty line marked next of kin was a painful, constant reminder of my betrayal. As I signed the last page, I whispered a small, fierce vow, a promise to the tiny life inside me. I am his only family now, and I will be his strength. Signing that form alone was the hardest, most devastating thing I had ever done. When I finally woke up from the powerful, deep anesthesia, I was immediately faced with a dual nightmare. First, my small, fragile son, who I named Ethan, was fighting a terrifying battle for survival in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. He was born critically underweight and far too early, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires. Second, I myself was fighting a severe, dangerous post-operative infection. My body racked with a high fever and constant, aching pain. For the next month, my entire world was reduced to the harsh, bright lights of the hospital. My days and nights blended into a constant blur of beeping monitors, the harsh, metallic smell of the hospital, my own burning fever, and the agonizing, distant pleasure of touching my son's tiny, frail hand through the small, circular incubator port. Every day was an immense, lonely struggle for both of our lives, and I had to face the immense physical and emotional demands completely without Leo's support. It was a brutal, defining month-long fight. I was finally discharged from the hospital, but the most important part of me, Ethan, had to remain in the NICU. My empty apartment felt cold and strange without him. The medical bills, shocking and numerous, were already piling up on my kitchen table, a towering monument to my debt and isolation. I knew I couldn't afford to crumble. I needed to channel my pain into a powerful, organized weapon. I purchased a plain, solid leather-bound journal and titled it, with grim, serious determination, The Lion's Den Ledger. The very first page documented the exact minute Leo walked out the door. The following pages were dedicated to cold, factual evidence. Every single medical bill, a detailed log of every unanswered call to his old number, every piece of paperwork proving his complete and total absence, and every emotional note I wrote during those long, lonely nights beside Ethan's incubator. It was no longer a diary. It was a powerful, meticulous legal dossier, detailing every single act of his abandonment. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan was finally strong enough to come home, but he was still incredibly fragile and required constant, careful attention. I was drowning under the weight of the medical debt, and the anxiety of caring for a highly sensitive preemie was overwhelming. One afternoon, while carefully blending pureed vegetables for Ethan, whose tiny stomach was extremely sensitive to everything, a powerful, simple idea hit me. I realized there was a huge, completely untapped market for pure, specialized organic baby food designed specifically for sensitive, premature babies like my son. Using the last $200 I had managed to desperately scrape together from selling some old, expensive jewelry, I bought the best blender I could find and a huge supply of small glass jars. I started making the small batch purees in my small, cramped kitchen, calling them Ethan's Garden Blends. I worked through the nights, sterilizing, blending, and labeling, fueled only by a desperate, maternal determination to survive and keep my son healthy. The business started small and slow, relying only on word-of-mouth recommendations from local mothers in my small support group. But then a truly magical, unexpected thing happened that changed everything. A popular local mommy blogger, who had a massive and devoted following across the state, was struggling desperately with her own colicky baby. She bought a few jars of my specialized, pureed blends and, to my absolute shock, posted a powerful, emotional, 5-star review online. She called my food a true miracle for her baby's sensitive stomach. Overnight, the orders completely exploded. My small home-based operation was instantly overwhelmed. My inbox was flooded with orders from strangers, and I quickly had to call on my few remaining loyal friends to help me jar, label, and package the food. A small, successful business, born entirely out of my desperation and crushing debt, had unexpectedly gone viral. My relentless work was finally starting to pay off. As Ethan's Garden grew from a small kitchen operation to a true, professional business, I started to feel a powerful sense of freedom. But the shadow of Leo was still long and cold. One day, while scrolling through a friend's social media account, I accidentally stumbled across Leo's public Instagram profile. I froze, staring in horrified disbelief. The photos were sickeningly beautiful and incredibly detailed. They showed him and Mila, his much younger assistant, on lavish, expensive globe-trotting vacations. Skiing on perfectly white mountain slopes, relaxing on tropical beaches, and posing confidently next to a brand-new, luxury sports car. The final, bitter pill was the caption beneath one of his smiling photos. It read simply, "Living my truth. Finally free from the burden." The sight of him openly enjoying his easy, rich, selfish life while I had been fighting for our son's survival filled me with a deep, volcanic rage. But I realized that this rage was not a weakness. It was a powerful, intense new fuel that made me work harder and smarter every single day. The immense pressure of running a rapidly growing business while being a single mother to a child with lingering health issues finally started to show. I was exhausted all the time, constantly struggling to balance the factory production with Ethan's doctor appointments. My eccentric but incredibly brilliant Aunt Valeria, a retired family law attorney who commanded respect, decided to visit. She took one immediate look at my stressed, pale face and the huge piles of paperwork scattered around my office. Aunt Valeria did not offer any soft, easy pity or sympathy. Instead, she immediately asked to see the heavy, detailed Lion's Den ledger that I had been keeping for 8 years. She spent an hour reading every single entry, noting the precise dates of the abandonment, the medical bills, and the sheer lack of any contact from Leo. She closed the ledger and fixed me with a serious stare. "We need to find your prenuptial agreement, Rita," she commanded. "My old firm drafted it when you married Leo. I distinctly remember it had some serious teeth. That document is your protection." Aunt Valeria and I immediately went to the bank and finally located the large, official prenuptial agreement in a small, forgotten safe deposit box. The document was thick and dense with legal language. Aunt Valeria quickly flipped through the pages with sharp, professional speed, her eyes scanning the text until she stopped abruptly on a single, powerful page. Clause 12. I leaned closer and read the bold, decisive title. Parental Abandonment and Medical Desertion. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the words. The clause stated clearly that if one spouse willfully abandoned the other during a documented medical emergency, such as the near-fatal childbirth I had endured completely alone, it would result in the automatic forfeiture of all custody rights to any children born of the marriage. It also included a severe, crippling financial penalty. I vaguely remembered Leo scoffing at the clause when he signed it, calling it an absurd, silly legal formality. I had completely forgotten it even existed. But now, it felt like I was holding a powerful, ironclad shield that would protect my son forever. 8 long, productive, healing years had passed since that terrible day. My small home-based company, Ethan's Garden, was now a huge, nationally recognized, thriving brand with hundreds of employees and loyal customers across the country. Ethan, though still small for his age, was a strong, happy, and beautiful little boy. Our life was finally good, completely stable, and incredibly peaceful. Then, on a completely normal Tuesday morning, the past suddenly broke into my perfect present. A process server, a professional man in a dark suit, waited for me outside my main office entrance. He approached me quickly and handed me a thick, sealed stack of legal papers. My heart sank instantly, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. Leo was suing. The papers clearly stated that he was demanding full physical and legal custody of Ethan, claiming his rights as the biological father. The shock was immediate and intensely painful. My hard-won, peaceful life was officially over, and the brutal, ugly war was about to begin. Aunt Valeria immediately went to work, using all her old, deep connections in the city's legal community. She quickly dug into the details of Leo's current life, searching desperately for the strange, sudden motive behind this custody demand after 8 years of complete silence. The truth she uncovered was utterly brutal and completely predictable. Leo's life had completely fallen apart. His large family's manufacturing business was terribly failing, sinking deep into millions of dollars of debt. He had married Mila, but a bad car accident, which Aunt Valeria uncovered Leo had caused due to a DUI, had left Mila permanently unable to carry children. To secure his inheritance and a massive family trust fund, which required a male biological heir, Leo must present a biological son. He didn't want a relationship with Ethan. He wanted the key to his money. The betrayal was complete, but the motive was clear. Leo was not seeking a son. He was simply seeking a huge fortune. I went straight to my safe and pulled out the Lion's Den ledger. It was no longer a personal journal. It was a heavy official legal dossier, filled with 8 years of perfect, detailed evidence, medical records, financial statements, and personal notes. I then hired a brilliant, strategic, and famously fierce lawyer named Miriam, who was known for her devastating courtroom tactics. Miriam was immediately captivated by the ironclad nature of the prenuptial agreement and the meticulous detail I had collected in the ledger. She spent hours analyzing the precise timeline of the abandonment versus the medical crisis. "This is not simply a typical custody dispute, Rita," Miriam stated, her eyes shining with dangerous determination. "This is a case of criminal fraud and opportunism disguised as a family matter. They are making a colossal mistake, and we have the powerful facts to destroy his claim." The first preliminary hearing was a tense, horrible affair held in a bland, boring conference room at the courthouse. I saw Leo for the first time in 8 years. He looked completely worn down, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his thin frame, but his arrogance was still intact. He offered a small, smug smirk across the table, completely confident that his legal status as the biological father would automatically win the case for him. I felt nothing but cold, powerful indifference. The judge, a careful, serious man, listened to the aggressive claims from Leo's lawyers. The judge quickly ordered a standard, court-mandated paternity test to officially resolve the biological claims before they could proceed with any custody arguments. I knew this was just a simple, necessary formality, but a terrible, deep, primitive fear still tightened painfully in my stomach. The court-ordered paternity test was carried out quickly in a sterile, white, cold lab the following week. A technician carefully swabbed Ethan's cheek, then mine, and then Leo's. Leo went through the entire procedure with an air of immense entitlement, acting as if the test was just a small, insignificant bureaucratic inconvenience he had to endure before he could finally claim his family's massive trust fund. I stood there, watching my son, feeling a terrible, powerful sense of dread. What if the cold, hard, unfeeling letter of the law saw only his biology and ignored my 8 years of sacrifice, love, and protection? What if my long, lonely fight counted for absolutely nothing against Leo's simple, ancient claim of fatherhood? I tried desperately to calm myself, reminding myself of the power of Clause 12, but the fear was heavy and persistent. While we anxiously waited for the official paternity results, Leo's aggressive, expensive lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to completely destroy my character in the eyes of the court. They maliciously painted me as a cold, neglectful workaholic who had used her wealth to deliberately alienate Ethan from his supposedly devoted father. They tried to subpoena my extensive business records, desperately hoping to prove that I was never home, and that my professional success somehow made me an unfit mother. Miriam, my sharp lawyer, remained completely unfazed by their aggression. She just gave me a small, confident smile. "Let them waste their time attacking your business, Rita," she instructed me calmly. "They are playing a shallow, weak game. They are spending millions to avoid the truth in that ledger. We have the ironclad prenuptial clause 12, and it is ready to strike." The delivery of the paternity test results hit the court like a sudden, violent earthquake. Leo's lawyer, a slick man who was usually arrogant, immediately requested an urgent, private, unscheduled meeting with the judge, his face pale and dripping with sweat. Miriam was immediately summoned to the judge's chambers. She returned to me looking both stunned and intensely determined. The news she gave me was completely unbelievable and utterly shocking. The summary of the test results was clear and undeniable. Leo was completely excluded as the biological father of Ethan. I felt a confusing mix of relief and utter disbelief. I had been perfectly faithful to Leo until the day he left. How could this be true? The initial shock quickly turned into a confusing sense of righteous alarm that something was deeply wrong and scientifically complex. Leo, in a complete and total panic, exploded violently in the judge's private chambers. He immediately started yelling accusations, claiming I was guilty of massive infidelity, that I had hidden Ethan's true paternity for 8 long years, and that I was committing a massive fraud to secure the trust fund. He demanded a new, immediate paternity test, alleging that the testing lab was corrupt and that I had somehow manipulated the entire result. The judge, now visibly concerned and completely overwhelmed by the resulting chaos and the impossibility of the result, ordered all parties, along with the director of the sterile testing lab, to reconvene for an immediate, urgent, closed-door hearing to sort out the complex situation. Leo's face was now a mask of pure, frantic desperation. Miriam, showing her brilliant strategy, did not waste a single word or moment defending me against Leo's baseless, ridiculous claims of infidelity. Instead, she immediately filed an emergency motion to subpoena my complete, untouched medical records from the day Ethan was born. The full surgical report, the detailed blood transfusion logs, and the specific NICU admittance notes. I was still completely confused, but I trusted her completely. She was not fighting Leo's current lie about my faithfulness. She was preparing to expose a much deeper, complex, and unforeseen medical truth that was hidden in the details of my nearly fatal childbirth. I handed over the thick stack of papers, which documented my medical trauma and the massive, life-saving blood replacement I had needed 8 years ago. In the closed emergency hearing, Miriam called a renowned hematologist, an expert in blood science and genetics, to the witness stand. The hematologist calmly and expertly explained a rare, complex, and unexpected medical phenomenon known as genetic chimerism. He explained to the judge that due to the massive, life-saving blood transfusion I had received from an anonymous male donor during my placental abruption crisis, a small percentage of Ethan's circulating blood cells could carry a tiny, traceable amount of the donor's DNA profile. He stated clearly that standard, simple cheek swab tests, which analyze the circulating blood cells, could accidentally pick up this small trace of donor DNA, leading to a completely false exclusion result for Leo. The hematologist completely clarified the terrifying situation with scientific authority. He confirmed that Ethan was unequivocally and legally my biological son. The anomalous result that excluded Leo was nothing more than a forensic quirk, a strange, undeniable signature left by the medical trauma I had suffered. The very same life-threatening trauma that Leo had callously abandoned me during. Miriam then powerfully presented the original hospital birth records, which clearly documented Leo's complete, total, and willful absence. The only crime and the only massive fraud committed here, Miriam stated firmly, looking directly at Leo, was his complete and total dereliction as a husband and a father, exactly as detailed in the Lion's Den ledger. Leo's entire body seemed to visibly deflate in the face of the crushing scientific and legal truth. Leo's entire case for custody, which he had built entirely on his supposed, superior biological claim, was now completely in tatters, shattered by a tiny, unforeseen medical quirk from 8 years ago. The judge was visibly appalled and intensely angered by the powerful medical evidence of Leo's cold, cruel abandonment during a major life-or-death crisis. Leo was now left with absolutely no legal standing or claim to Ethan. His own expensive, now frustrated lawyers immediately advised him, whispering urgently in his ear, that he must withdraw his entire petition immediately. But Leo, now driven by nothing but pure, reckless, self-destructive fury, refused to listen to any reason. He screamed, "I deserve my son. He is my ticket." He had completely lost the legal argument, but his emotional, selfish rage now controlled him entirely, making him dangerous and pathetic. With Leo's custody case completely destroyed and him refusing to retreat, I knew we had to deliver the final, devastating blow. I did not hesitate. I gave Miriam the go-ahead, and she immediately shifted from a careful defense to an aggressive, overwhelming offense. They filed a new, powerful motion to immediately enforce the terms of the old prenuptial clause 12, officially suing Leo for the legal offense of medical desertion. The crippling financial penalty clause in the prenup was instantly triggered. 50% of Leo's entire net worth at the exact time of the initial lawsuit filing. We knew this powerful legal move would completely and utterly destroy him financially, but he had left me absolutely no choice. He had to face the full legal consequences of his cruel, selfish abandonment. The legal discovery process that followed for the prenup enforcement was fast, deep, and financially devastating for Leo. It revealed the complete truth about Leo's current financial situation. He was not a rich man seeking to protect his huge wealth. He was a desperate, ruined man hiding behind a facade of money. His supposed net worth was not massive at all, but dangerously negative. He was millions of dollars in debt. His family's manufacturing business was officially bankrupt, and all of his remaining personal assets were completely leveraged to the banks. The full enforcement of the financial penalty from Clause 12 would not just hurt him slightly. It would completely annihilate him, leaving him with nothing but his debts and his shame. His cruel, selfish ambition had completely destroyed his life, and now the law was officially delivering the final paperwork. The final, complete ruin of Leo's reputation came from the last place he expected: his own family. Leo's traditional, severe, and image-obsessed family finally learned the full devastating story. The cruel, cold abandonment of his pregnant wife during a medical emergency, the horrific DUI car accident that injured Mila, and the humiliating chimera paternity scandal exposed in open court. They were publicly disgraced. They immediately and publicly disinherited him, removing his name from the will. The massive family trust fund, the only selfish reason he had fought for custody, was permanently locked away from him forever. He was now financially, legally, and personally ruined. He was utterly, completely alone, with no family, no wife, and no son to comfort him. The final court hearing was not a fight, but a painful formality. Leo, now representing himself because his expensive lawyers had all quit, stood before the judge as a truly broken, pathetic figure. He ranted incoherently, pleaded desperately, and finally broke down, crying hot, ugly tears, begging the judge for a second chance that he had never earned. The judge, tired of his arrogance and drama, was decisive and merciless. The judge ruled quickly. 1. Leo's petition for custody was permanently dismissed with prejudice. 2. The powerful prenuptial clause 12 was completely upheld, setting a serious precedent. The full financial judgment of 50% of his former net worth was officially entered, attaching itself like a heavy, permanent chain to any of his future earnings. The cruel, selfish abandonment was now his permanent, legal, and financial legacy. I sat Ethan down that evening in his bedroom. I explained the whole situation to him in a simple, quiet, age-appropriate manner. I told him a man who was never there tried to take him away from the only person who had always loved him, but the strong law and the powerful truth kept him safe forever. I emphasized that I was the one who signed the papers to save his life, and that I would always protect him. I gave him the choice to ask me any single question he wanted about the confusing, adult drama. He looked at me with his large, serious eyes, processing the complex, grown-up reality. After a long moment of deep, thoughtful silence, he asked the most important question in his small world. "Mom, now that the bad stuff is over, can we finally get that dog you promised?" The powerful innocence of his question reminded me that the painful fight was completely over, and real life was still waiting patiently for us. One peaceful, beautiful year later, our life was finally full of simple, easy joy and stability. Ethan and I were in our new sunlit backyard, happily throwing a frisbee for a goofy, joyful rescue dog we named Zeus. My business, Ethan's Garden, was more successful and stable than ever, and a major business magazine featured my photo on its glossy cover, calling me a CEO of resilience. Then I noticed him, on a public park bench across the quiet street, A shabbily dressed, older, completely unrecognizable man sat alone, watching us. It was Leo. I glanced up, met his gaze for a single, powerful moment of recognition, and then I simply turned back to my son's happy laughter. Leo was the past, small, sad, and irrelevant. The camera of my life, my focus, was completely and permanently off of him, and entirely on the beautiful new dawn of my life with my son, our dog, and our deep, powerful peace.